Jai Hind. So let's read the editorial today of Hindu. So the first one is part of a pattern. Uh, Courts should be wary of giving a toehold to communal forces in religious disputes. Hindu revanchism has found a way to use the legal route to record early success in its latest communal campaign. The district court in Varanasi has rejected objections to the maintainability of a suit filled by five Hindu devotees seeking the right of daily worship at the spot in the Gyanvapi mosque. So till now you must have understood that this is about the Gyanvapi case that is being going on. Okay, so of particular significance is that the court ruled that the suit is not prohibited by places of worship. Special Provision Act 1991, which freezes the status of the places of worship as it was on August 15, 1947, and bars suits that seek to change their character. On the fact of it, the ruling only paves the way for the suit to be heard and is in consonance with law. The the plaintiffs have argued that the spot had the status of a Hindu temple on that day and ever since, and that the suit does not seek to convert a mosque into a temple. On the other hand, they are only demanding the right to worship deities in the complex. If limited to this assertion of a religious and customary right, the suit may indeed not be barred by the 1991 law. However, it is a matter of concern that the ruling is also grounded in other claims that appear to question the mosque's status. For instance, the court says records produced by Anjuman Intizamiya Masjid Committee were not enough to show that the complex was Waqf property. Thus, Waqf is a board of Muslim board. This appears in concert with the Hindu side's claim that Muslims were enroachers, and an assertion that clearly makes it a dispute aimed at converting the property's statute. Courts should be wary of understanding designs behind the legal facade that such litigations build to gain a toehold right that can be incrementally expanded. The mere pendency of some kind of religious dispute can contribute to vitiation, vitiation of peace and harmony. It is now clear that enactment of a special law to freeze the status of places of worship and prohibit litigation over interreligious disputes over their location has not stemmed the Hindu right wing's obsession with the targeting mosque and stoking communal passions. It is no surprise that the latest efforts to raise civil and legal disputes involving a Gyanvapi mosque in Varanasi and Shahi Eidgah Mosque in Mathura are being made in tandem with a campaign against the Places of Worship Act. Several petitions have been filed challenging its validity. That such a campaign does not, despite the experience of communal frenzy through the 1990s, show the unregenerate nature of majoritarian forces. The abominable destruction of the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya, the communal riots that took place in its aftermath, the serial bomb blast in the Mumbai, and the fundamentalist violence that the sentence of the event spawned cannot be forgotten. It is unfortunate that an atmosphere has been created in which the political leadership can encourage division, litigation, and exploit the process, if not influence the outcome. So this is finished. Let's go to next one. The top its heading is that for India, the buzzword now is all alignment. Its partition in the SCO summit is a clear signal of pursuing multi-alignment with its partners worldwide. So it is somewhere relating to the Afghanistan thing and the SCO meeting that is going to held recently. In his book The India Way, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar offers a critique of India's traditional policy of non-alignment, where he distinguishes between the optimistic non-alignment of the past, which he feels has failed, that must give way to more realistic multiple engagements of the future. He writes, "This is a game best played on the front foot, appreciating that progress on any one front strengthens that on all others." By announcing his visit to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization (SCO) summit in Samarkand, Uzbekistan this week, between 6 September 15 and 16, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has certainly spoken with his feet, as have the other leaders attending the event. At the time when lingering strains of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russian war in Ukraine, the upcoming Chinese Party Congress in October, and floods in Pakistan could well have given them reason to hold the summit virtually, as they have for the past 2 years. Instead, the Uzbekistan SCO summit will host a full house, 15 leaders, including 8 member states from 4 Central Asian states: China, India, Pakistan, and Russia. The observer states, Belarus, Mongolia, and Iran, which will become member in this year. It is under bracket. Afghanistan is not invited. The leaders of the guest countries Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkmenistan. Next heading, balancing the blocks. Even before the summit begins, Mr. Modi, by his plans to attend, is the world a number of messages. To begin with, the visit reinforces his commitment to an Indian foreign policy that balances various blocks, pitting India's membership of the SCO and BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, against its membership of Quad. As we know, India is member of both the Quad and the BRICS. So the Quad members are Australia, India, Japan, and the US. Groups such as I2U2, India, Israel, US, and UAE, and the Indo-Pacific Economic Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. This was highlighted more recently with India joining the Russian-led Vostok Army exercise along with the China, and plans to host SEO rats on the regional anti-terrorism structure, that is the full form of rats of Shanghai Cooperation SEO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization counter-terror exercise, while the Indian Air Force took part in the Australian Pitch Black exercise that held in Australia, and Indian Army is oh shit, I'm sorry. The Indian Air Force took part in the Australian Pitch Black exercises, and the Indian Army is planning exercises with the US Yuddhabhyas next closer LAC. It is in Uttarakhand. In a Venn diagram, India is the only country that would form the intersection, a part of all those groupings, that is Quad, SCO, and others. Another juxtaposition is that of values over interest, or that of Western brands of a coalition of democracies against a more Eurasian brand of a coalition of common goals. It is worth noting that SCO membership is not premised on India's traditional non-aligned postures. While Mr. Modi has skipped all the non-aligned movement summits in his tenure, the only Indian Prime Minister to do so apart from the caretaker Prime Minister Charan Singh in 1979, caretaker Prime Minister Charan Singh. Okay, he chose to lead India into the SCO in 2017. Next year, India will host the SCO summit and is expected to invite all the members. This includes China, Chinese President Xi Jinping, Pakistan's President Minister Shehbaz Sharif, if he will be the president till that time, showing how far New Delhi will be willing to go in its commitment with SEO or Russia's Putin. The next basket of signals Mr. Modi sends out is to individual members of the SEO, regardless of whether he will hold a one with each of their leaders or leaders on the CD lines or not. The first is to Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is under a Western siege over his invasion of Ukraine. Since February, India has refused to heed pleas from the US and Europe to endorse resolution critical of Russia at UN and has most often abstained on voting. The government voting sorry abstained on voting. The government has not only rejected calls to cut its Russian oil import, but it has also done the reverse. Imports of Russian oil jumps from 0.66 million tons in the first quarter to 8.42 million tons in the second this year. In particular, Rosneft part owned Gujarat-based refinery Nayara Energy has imported a substantial part of oil, much of it for export of crude products. During a virtual address at the Putin-led Eastern Economic Forum last week, Mr. Modi also said India wants to further strengthen energy ties, building on 16 billion investment. Indian public sector units already have in Russian oil and gas fields. A Modi Putin summit at this point would send out a much more powerful message to Western leaders who are planning to boycott Mr. Putin at the upcoming G20 summit in Bali in November. Meetings with these leaders. The other most closely watched engagement will be between Mr. Modi and Mr. Xi. The two leaders, who met 18 times between 2014 to 19, have not spoken directly once since the standoff that began in April 2020. Between as we If you remember that there was a standoff in Galwan Valley or between India and China where we lost our soldiers from the Bihar regiment. Colonel Santosh Babu was his name. Uh, the standoff that began in April 2020 between the Indian Army and PLA of China, India-China bilateral ties have come to a virtual standstill on most fronts, with the exception of trade. And many have been skeptical that the latest round of disengagement at the LAC's patrolling point PP-15 can pave the way for summit level discussions at this point in the relationship. It seems likely that the leaders will come face to face during the summit, and any discussion will be significant. It should be remembered that during Doklam conflict, it was a brushed by meeting between Mr. Modi and Mr. Xi at G20 summit venue in Hamburg in July 2017 that led to breakthrough in talks and resulted in the Mr. Modi's visit to Xiamen for the BRICS summit. 2 months later, in September 2017, a similar trajectory may be pursued leading up to the G20 summit in Bali. To those aghast at the idea that India can hold such a meeting, despite the PLA's transgression into Indian territory, it must be recalled that the government has never formally stated that Chinese troops are on Indian soil or updated Mr. Modi June 2020 assertion that no one came inside nor is anyone inside the Indian territory. Other important signal would come from a proposed summit with Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi, given that Mr. Modi at the CEO summit is expected to pitch the Chabahar port terminal India is developing Shahid Bahishti as an important route for trade to Central Asia and Russia. Although India is no longer a part of the railway connecting project from Chabahar, Iran, and Iran has asked for support with above ground equipment and pass for its plan to extend the rail line from Afghan border outpost to Turkmenistan, the shortest possible route for India. This would also tie in with the Modi government's plan to build a connectivity framework that counters the China-Pakistan economic corridor from Gwadar port, which China plans to connect through Afghanistan to Central Asia. Last week, Afghanistan, China, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan signed a railway agreement for the new regional economic corridor to take the plan forward. The oil issue. In addition to connectivity, Iran will focus in meetings with India on restoring Indian imports of Iranian crude at the earliest, while India cancelled its Iran oil purchases, a sizable 12% chunk of its import in 2019 after the Donald Trump administration in the US threatened New Delhi with sanctions. It is clear the geopolitical maps has changed since then. The Biden administration is back in negotiation with Iran for its re-entry at the Joint Comprehensive Plan Action JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action Nuclear Agreement, the P51. The EU and Iran. There is some nuclear agreement between the US and the Iran, and is much more focused on curtailing Russia's oil revenues than on Iran's. It is puzzling that the Modi government it asserts its right to buy discounted Russian oil in order to stave off inflation for the Indian customers, has not yet considered receiving its old, cheaper, and sweeter crude contracts that Indian refineries are better suited for. New Delhi also reviews its decision to to the US's unilateral non-UN sanctions on Iran and Venezuela. Most recently, the Modi government's decision to push back against the American threats of sanction on the S-400 Triumph missile defense system deals and on oil trade with Russia has forced the US to blink. Finally, Pakistan. Finally, there are the optics of the Indian and Pakistan Prime Ministers attending the same conference, which will undoubtedly lead to speculation about a possible thaw in a frozen relationship after the Modi government's claim in 2016 that it would ensure Pakistan is isolated on the terror issue, and the decision by the government of Imran Khan in 2019 that no trade with India is possible without a reversal of New Delhi's Article 370 moves in Jammu and Kashmir. Formal communication has all but ended. However, a powerful back channel with the National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and Pakistani military interlocutors is evidenced by the ceasefire being largely maintained at the line of control, regular border commander talks, and the relative calm after the misfiring of an Indian ballistic missile into the Pakistan this year March, with Pakistan reeling from a massive floods, an economic crisis, and growing worries of an unstable Afghanistan at its border. It remains to be seen whether the Pakistan leader Sharif can find a way to hold a conversation with Mr. Modi at SCO, and if Mr. Modi, with an eye to hosting the SCO and the G20 next year, is willing to reciprocate. Above all, India's participation in the SCO summit and Mr. Modi's decision to stand shoulder to shoulder with Putin, Xi, Raisi, Erdogan, Lukashenko, just months after he met with Kishida and Albanese at the Quiet Summit, affirms Mr. Jaisankar's prognosis that hedging is the name of the game today as India fights for its unique brand of multi-alignment or all-alignment with partners worldwide without having to choose between them, as in Tokyo and Samarkand just showing up as half the battle won. So let's go to a next one, a different slam. It is about the sports, basically about the tennis. Alcaraz and Swiatek have emerged on the top from show and tennis, connecting the dots to boost the patent ecosystem.